Okay, so you want to become a veterinarian? Spend your childhood loving animals? Get the degree, open a clinic, and spend your days saving puppies and getting paid well for it? It's one of the only careers that consistently shows up on most trusted profession surveys. People genuinely adore their vets, and pet spending in the United States alone crossed $150 billion in recent years, with owners treating their animals more like family members every year than they did a decade ago. So here's the question worth sitting with before you commit 8 years of your life and hundreds of thousands of dollars to this path. If people love their vets this much and spend this much on their pets, why does veterinary medicine have one of the highest rates of burnout, debt distress, and mental health crisis of any healthcare profession in the country? The answer is that a veterinarian isn't really selling medical expertise. They're selling brutal, repeated emotional labor delivered to grieving strangers while carrying medical school debt at a fraction of a physician's eventual income. Understand that mismatch, and every strange number in this profession starts to make sense. Start with the cost of entry, because this is where the math turns hostile before a single patient walks through the door. Veterinary school runs 4 years after a bachelor's degree, and unlike human medicine, there are far fewer veterinary schools relative to the number of applicants, which keeps tuition high and acceptance rates brutally competitive, often forcing applicants to apply 2 or 3 cycles in a row before getting in anywhere at all. Average veterinary school debt for graduates in the United States now regularly exceeds $180,000, and a meaningful share of graduates carry debt well past $250,000 once interest during school is factored in. Out-of-state and private program tuition alone can run $50,000 to $70,000 a year, before living expenses, books, and equipment are even added on top. Compare that to the average starting salary for a new veterinarian, which typically lands somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000, depending on specialty and location. A new physician carrying similar debt levels can reasonably expect a starting salary 2 to 3 times higher within a few years, plus a clearer, more standardized path through residency into a specialty that pays substantially more. A new veterinarian does not get that same trajectory. The debt-to-income ratio in this profession is genuinely one of the worst of any postgraduate degree in the country, and it isn't a rare outlier case. It's close to the industry average. Now assume you survive veterinary school and land a job at a clinic. Here's where the emotional economics of the job actually reveal themselves. Unlike a physician whose patient can describe their own symptoms, a vet's patient can't speak, which means every single diagnosis depends on reading an anxious, sometimes aggressive animal while simultaneously managing an anxious, sometimes aggressive owner standing beside it. And because a huge share of an owner's love for their pet gets funneled through the vet who cares for it, when things go badly, when a diagnosis is terminal, when a beloved dog needs to be euthanized, the veterinarian is the one standing in the room, absorbing that grief directly, often multiple times in a single working day. Human doctors who deliver difficult news typically do so occasionally. Veterinarians who work in general practice or emergency medicine can face this exact scenario several times a week, year after year, for their entire career. Then layer on the financial conversation that makes this job uniquely brutal, because a vet frequently has to discuss costs directly with a grieving owner in the same breath as discussing treatment options. Should we run the $3,000 diagnostic workup? Or should we consider euthanasia because the owner genuinely cannot afford it? That question, medicine versus money, in front of a crying client standing over their dying pet, is a routine Tuesday for a working veterinarian. Few other medical professions force the practitioner to be simultaneously the doctor, the bad news deliverer, and the price negotiator, often within the same 5-minute conversation. This emotional load produces measurable consequences. Multiple studies on veterinary mental health have found suicide rates among veterinarians significantly higher than the general population, and elevated compared to human physicians as well. A statistic the profession itself has spent the last decade trying seriously to address through wellness programs and licensing board reforms. Add the debt burden, the emotional toll, and often demanding on-call and emergency hours, and you get an industry with genuinely severe burnout and attrition, particularly among younger veterinarians only a few years out of school, many of whom describe feeling trapped, unable to leave a profession they trained a decade for, yet unable to sustain the pace it demands of them long-term. So why does anyone still choose this path? And more importantly, why do some veterinarians end up thriving financially while so many others struggle under the debt for decades? The answer again down to who owns what. A veterinarian who spends their entire career as an associate, employed by someone else's clinic, working on salary or a modest production bonus, is in the weakest financial position in the industry, no matter how skilled they are. The veterinarians who do well financially are almost always the ones who eventually own equity, either by owning their own practice outright or by holding a stake in a multi-location group. And in recent years, this ownership question has been reshaped entirely by a wave of consolidation. Large corporate groups and private equity-backed veterinary chains have been aggressively buying up independent practices across the country, often paying retiring vet owners a substantial multiple of their clinic's earnings for the business, sometimes 7 to 10 times annual profit for a well-run practice in a desirable area. This has created two very different tracks. Veterinarians who own equity, either in an independent practice or in shares of a larger consolidated group, can build genuine long-term wealth as these businesses get bought and sold, and often negotiate a rollover equity stake when they sell to a corporate buyer, meaning they keep benefiting as the larger group continues acquiring more clinics around them. Veterinarians working purely as employed associates inside those same corporate-owned clinics often see production quotas increase, scheduling pressure rise, and their share of the revenue stay largely fixed, even as the parent company's profits grow substantially around them, month after month, clinic after clinic. Run the numbers on two versions of this career. In the realistic scenario, a veterinarian graduates with $220,000 in debt, takes an associate position at a corporate-owned clinic earning $95,000 a year, and spends a decade making minimum loan payments under an income-driven repayment plan while the debt barely shrinks due to accumulating interest. After taxes, loan payments, and the cost of maintaining licensure and continuing education, realistic annual disposable income can sit uncomfortably close to what a much less credentialed profession would provide, without anywhere near the same hours or emotional toll. In the strong scenario, a veterinarian spends 8 to 10 years building clinical experience and client trust, then either buys into an existing practice or opens their own, eventually owning a clinic, generating $1.5 million in annual revenue with healthy margins after staff, rent, and supplies. That ownership position alone, separate from their own clinical salary, can be worth several $100,000 a year in true take-home value, and represents an asset that can eventually be sold for a substantial payout upon retirement, the exact wealth-building mechanism the employed associate down the hall never gets access to. The mistake almost everyone makes walking into this career is assuming that loving animals is the qualification. It's necessary, but it was never the differentiator. What actually separates the veterinarian buried under debt for 2 decades from the one who builds real wealth is whether they understood early that they weren't just entering a medical profession, they were entering a small business industry disguised as one, and that the person who owns the clinic captures a version of this career entirely different from the one available to everyone else standing beside them in the exam room.